Hello, welcome everyone to our webinar this afternoon on cultural sensitivity.
My name's Chris Arning. I am a semiotician, brand expert, writer and creative, and as has been said, run an agency. My passion for this subject is partly gleaned from my lived experience as well as from my work. And as I've shared with the panel, I think we're living post-COVID and now George Floyd, we're living in an era where kind of more humanity seems more welcome in the corporate world. So I think this is a very timely event. The tragic death of George Floyd at the end of March has sparked off a humanitarian movement, which, whatever your thoughts on Black Lives Matter, there is the idea of racism existing has come into the agenda again. And it turns out it's not just institutional, it exists in actual people. I know, crazy. But I think it does actually provide a unique opportunity for us all, because I think that things actually go a lot deeper than unconscious bias. But my thing is we need to destigmatize the idea of racism being something that a lot of us suffer from, including myself. It might be uncomfortable, but I feel that's important for us to move forward. I believe it's us about closing the empathy gap between people that maybe suffer from the more egregious forms of racism and people that don't, but are actually very well-meaning. And I've had white friends, I've had conversations with people. I even did a racism quiz on Zoom. That was a surprise for my friends. But people are actually having a lot more open conversations about this. And this is what I think partly what we're doing here today. I don't want to speak for the other panelists, but I'm here because I think we can all do better. We can all learn. I can learn as well. And I feel like I can be a fair broker in this discussion. So I've been asked why this subject matters and how brands and companies should be pushing the agenda forward. Well, I think we need to leave behind the platitudes of just talking about diversity and inclusion when it comes to cultural identity. I think we need to go further. I also think we need to sort of recognize that it's about being color brave rather than color blind, which is something I heard recently. A recent poll conducted for ITV reported that whilst those who are not of color in the UK believe that the people that believe that racism had decreased in their lifetime was 5% more than those that believed it increased. It was the opposite for people of colour, which shows there is a perception gap and there's an empathy gap. And I think if you work in advertising, the fact that we have an atrocity like H&M's Monkey in the Jungle, Prada, I think it's Prada Blackface, don't want to badmouth Prada if it wasn't, but another fashion label, and Kendall Jenner and Pepsi trivialising the complexity of racial injustice, the fact that those things happen show there have to be blind spots. Otherwise, we assume those are bad people in those rooms that sign that off. And I don't think we believe that. I certainly don't believe that. But I think, obviously, we need to look at our blind spots. Why is this important for brands? Well, I think there's two things. If you think about people of colour, my experience looking at the idea of insensitivity and representations, advertising, other sort of brand communication is people of colour, it can come across as being out of touch and offensive. At the very least, it will dampen engagement, could cause alienation or even lead to activism. And the brand can be seen as being dehumanizing and exclusionary, but at the very least tone deaf. And that can be something like this brand doesn't think that I'm British because of their representations, or this brand doesn't understand mixed race relationships or whatever it might be. But for even a sizable minority of non-people of colour, i.e. white people, if I can say that, it signifies you're off the pace, out of touch, and part of the problem. And an increasing number of people are recognising that actually you don't have to be a person of colour to not like racism. And there are people that are educating themselves about this stuff. So you're hit on that side too. And I would say there's nothing that kills brand cool faster than racism. So I feel that for me is the next move, is the next paradigm is recognising it's not just about systemic racism, but about dealing with racism with education. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff around the curriculum in this country about educating people as to why people like me are in this country, although I consider myself totally British. How can I help? Just segue onto that, because I don't want to take up too much time. Well, I do semiotics, which is the study of culture and visual signs, focus on the cues and hidden meanings, the implicit communication within all brands, because all brands are bundles of signs and visual cues that have meaning for people. And it's kind of like seeing through the matrix, if I'm honest. That's sort of what we do, doing semiotics.
My name's Sam. I'm a freelance journalist and writer. With both Chinese and Vietnamese heritage, I'm interested in the questions of race and identity, and also strongly advocate for social justice and equality. These themes are present throughout my work, in which I aim to amplify Asian voices as well as to challenge injustice against all marginalized people. My focus most recently has been addressing the racial abuse that the British East and Southeast Asian community here in Britain has been subjected to, which has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. I really believe that having this conversation is important because I feel that the Asian voice has been kind of neglected in the discourse on racism, and I'm proud to have been able to be part of the push in having more East and Southeast Asian voices in the British media, which has often been rendered invisible. But this work has also given me the opportunity to speak on and raise awareness around issues faced by other communities of colour. I believe that it's important to be intersectional when talking about minoritized groups, and to look at the particular issues faced by all communities, as we cannot speak about eradicating racial discrimination for one group and not another. This leads me to the label of Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic, which I will refer to as BAME because it's slightly better than the lazy BAME, as it at least emphasizes the B and the A rather than a lazy catch-all syllable. The acronym BAME first gained currency in the 1980s and is rooted in the idea of political blackness that united various ethnic minorities in order to fight racial discrimination and injustice. This term, which is used to describe ethnic minorities, has been necessary in some contexts, but has been limiting in others. As F. Hirsch puts eloquently, the concept of BAME creates the impression that as long as the minority box can be ticked, the job of improving diversity is done. The problem with the term is that it doesn't allow for nuance. For example, in general, Black students of African origin academically outperform Black students of Caribbean descent, yet BAME doesn't allow for these nuances and prefers to box these two differentiating experiences in the B of BAME. In order to really address the issues at hand, it's important that we do not lump all minorities under a single label and see us as a monolithic mass who all have the same degree of discrimination and oppression. For me personally, when starting out working in the journalism industry, I remember working at a reputable news organization and having the menial task of organizing the calendar for the Instagram page. I was tasked with adding important dates on the calendar so that they could make posts dedicated to important days of the year. And I remember quickly having the realization that many important cultural events for ethnic minorities were missing, including Windrush Day, International Day for Abolition of Slavery, Chinese New Year, Ramadan, and Diwali. It made me realize that even the smallest role in an industry could change so much for people to feel represented. These important dates could have been easily overlooked if a white person was to have organized that calendar that day. And this goes to show why it's important that the internal structures of an organization must change and how it's important to have voices from all communities within. This would enable a company to engage with its audience more authentically and with a greater awareness to these important cultural events and sensitivities. This highlights why companies need to stay one step ahead to authentically engage with different communities rather than performatively responding to controversies. It's about committing to ongoing collaborations and investing in voices that matter on these topics to change for the better and become actively anti-racist in the company's morals and ethos, rather than having quick fixes and performative responses to jump on the bandwagon and act like they care about ethnic minorities in order to capitalize on the movement. Thus, we should not cluster ethnic minorities together, check the BAME box and move on, but instead foster a mentality that actively dismantles racist tropes and stereotypes and keeps these important cultural nuances and sensitivities in mind.
My name is Oris Ikomi. I help with I help organisations to bridge that gap between them and audiences from Black and Asian minority ethnic groups. And over the years, I've had the opportunity to work with some leading global brands, including the civil service to manage projects and engaging Black and Asian talent, and also work with organisations to create, looking at how, especially understanding the cultural differences amongst Black and Asian sort of communities. A lot of the work I do came from a lived experience as well as professional experience. So probably thinking that I was probably from white, probably think I was born and raised in London. However, I wasn't. I moved up to the UK when I was 17. So I'll leave it to figure out my age. And moving up to the UK, so I really struggled with, identity. So for example, I have my siblings, some of them were born in the UK and living under the same roof, but I just could not relate to some of the things that they were saying. Same mom, same dad, different experiences. You know, meet friends who talk about TV programs. I'm like, I don't really know what you're talking about. But because of how I sound, they assume, you know, I'm born and raised in London, in England. So this really affected me, and you know, got me to a place. I think when I was about 20, so navigating through these challenges, I made a decision that I'm going to work with organisations to bridge that gap, to understand, you know, Black people, understand Black marriage ethnic groups, because you know, we think differently, behave differently. You know, because I always use that there are many shades of Black. You know, so for example, in my case, like I said, I have brothers and sisters. I have a Nigerian perspective, whereas they don't have that. So because of me being Black, again, one thing I found that was quite strange is that people assume that, oh, because I'm Black, I should like certain Black things or certain Black music. And I'm thinking, no, I like country music, or I like, you know, I like to go, you know, forage berries, for example. When I told my friend, I was like, dude, you're a bit weird. What Black did you find that forages berries? Again, that just goes to show that, you know, we cannot relate to people based on the color of the skin, because there is a human being behind all of this. I grew up in Nigeria. The whole term Black was non-existent. We just saw ourselves as Nigerians, you know, our cultures, our tribes. But this is why, again, from my lived experience, why I'm so, you know, sort of made that decision to pursue this as a not just a career, but actually really bridging this gap, because failure to do so has a massive impact on, you know, diverse talent who are not able to fulfill their potential because people don't understand them. And you know, I watch TV adverts, and for example, I think one that might be shared later on, that, you know, just makes young Black people feel like, that's not me, feel a bit, you know, traumatized. And this is why, again, going back to why I think this is important for business in particular, to do this work, particularly to understand different cultures, is that there is a psychological traumatic impact on, especially, you know, Black and minority ethnic groups when they watch adverts that are not, you know, reflection actually they are.
I wanted to start my few slides. So the idea here is to bring the business perspective back and trying to understand, you know, how, when can we help? How can the experts help? Sorry. And I thought I would start with an example. So I'm sure many of you have seen this. It was a campaign that was launched by the government last year in August. To help combat knife crime, which has been an issue around the country for quite a few years. Their target audience was 10 to 21 years old from all backgrounds, and they came up with the concept of #KnifeFree. It was promoted across various channels, including some chicken outlets, so over 200 across the country. And obviously, this is a campaign that did backfire, and I think the comment at the bottom of the screen really says it all, really. Despite the good intentions, obviously this was not received very well and did not resonate across the various communities, and particularly the Black communities. And in fact, Mr. Uchi from Word on the Curb, which is a content agency driven around insights and youth, had a really good response to this. A few weeks later, they organized an experiential campaign at Westfield in Stratford, where they asked all of the people coming into the shopping center to actually write on chicken boxes how they would have wanted to be addressed within this campaign, and give ideas in terms of how the campaign could have been rolled out. And after that, the chicken boxes were all sent to the government as a response to what had happened. So with that in mind, I think it's fair to say that, you know, despite the good intentions, if the execution is not right or well-informed, things will undeniably backfire. And it's very important to be able throughout the process to tackle the various areas and to involve, as I said, the communities and the experts to make sure that the messages are right. So how do we pave the roads in the right direction? And I think it won't come as a surprise for all three, for the marketeers that are present, that I took three concepts that come from marketing, but are very, very relevant in this case. I think it's all about educating, engaging, and empowering. And this applies not only to the teams internally, it's giving them the tools, of course, empowering them to know how to produce whatever messages, initiatives that they're putting together to be relevant and on point, but it's also engaging with the communities to better understand their perspective and how they want to be addressed effectively.
What's your advice for companies on speaking out at the moment so they don't seem tone deaf or virtual signalling, but they aren't also silent on other issues?
I suppose with this, it's about, first of all, it's about companies really taking a step back and really questioning their motives behind why do we want to say something, you know, and really have that sort of self-reflection and awareness to say, okay, why are we saying this? What is the purpose of what's the purpose behind it? The point is about, yeah, just really taking a step back to think about motives, why, and see how it fits again to your organization. If it's not really why this is so important? If it's not aligned to your organization's sort of mission, if it's not authentic, if it's not real, it does come across as well when people read it. So this is why it's so important to really take that step to really think about it properly and to make sure that it's authentic. And actually, sometimes it's better off to scan internally first of all to see, are we actually living what it is that we're about to put out there. And if it's not true to what's happening internally, so it might be better off to just maybe not post something, or actually just say, this is just really share something authentic. So, this is where we're at currently. We may find, it's challenging for us to actually comment on this matter because we don't really have much experiences. However, because of what's happening, we feel we should say something we are learning, just something that's more real and authentic. So that, again, as human beings, we're very intelligent now to know whether someone is actually being real or not real.
Completely agree with what Oris says. I think there is that it's a struggle with companies nowadays, and a lot of people have come out to support Black Lives Matter, but when we look at how the staff are treated, how Black staff are treated, they're often still the people who are underpaid, who don't have the same opportunities as other people. So it's all and well wanting to pronounce to the world that you support Black Lives Matter, but if Black lives don't matter in your company, then that there's a real problem there.
And I think there's a distinction needs to be made between something that comes out of brand purpose and something that is an opportunistic play around cause marketing, which someone latches into a current in society and they feel, as Sam was saying, that they can basically boost their cultural capital by interpolating themselves in a debate. There's a lot of traps that can be fallen into when trying to do the right thing. And as I think goes back to what Mel said in one of her slides, is that, road to hell can be paved with good intentions. And I'm not someone that looks for this stuff, but it is a thing. It is a thing. Often brands do fall on their face because they don't have the right people in the room to advise them.
How one can target various communities in the most relevant manner, because often BAME is characterized as one single topic, but the reality is that there's a lot of diversity within this segment, which defeats its purpose in the first place. So how does one go about it?
Yeah, I think it's a hard question because it's, there are so many communities, and I know that I get that it's hard for a company to try and target everyone. At the same time, I think the issue is when a company tries to target different demographics and think that the job is done by kind of giving a blanket, let's say, advertisement that doesn't really mean anything, and then it makes the messaging unclear, it makes the company's morals unclear, and then it just kind of causes a lot of controversy. So I think the way to combat that really is to really just have people of color in those positions in order to make the messaging clear. For example, I'll go back to Disney, because they have done quite a lot of movies nowadays where they're actually trying to get people of different, so for example Mulan, they've hired actual Chinese people, and even using actual Chinese instruments in the soundtrack, for example, when before they wouldn't have done that. So it's just, it's attention to detail that really makes a difference, I think.
If you understand a culture, that could be from you could actually go travel there to live there for a year, a week, or a day, wherever it is, actually just go and see what it's like there. I think that those lessons from that experience in itself are so valuable, so that when you design adverts, whether you might not have someone from a Black or Asian background within your team, but at least doing that in itself can make a huge difference. Actually, just really understanding, then it really helps actually form your thinking process when creating adverts, when creating content, to know that, because I'm aware of this, about this culture, so actually I know that this would be potentially be offensive or be appreciated, for example. So that's another thing I'll add to that. So education. I think learning and development departments could actually play a key role in that as well within organizations, to to educate teams, to actually create content and training programs on how to educate teams to actually understand different cultures and different. In essence, we're talking about culture, really, truly. So you have to really understand that.
How are semiotics and cultural sensitivities interlinked? We're interested in this, and can you tell us more about how semiotics and their role overall in the bigger picture? And do you have any interesting case studies to help?
I mean, I guess semiotics and cultural sensitivities are linked in the sense that semiotics is a look through the matrix of culture. It suggests that culture is the water through which we swim without noticing it. People are flabbergasted at how interesting British culture is, but when you do a semiotic study, as I did for BMW Mini, looking at Britishness abroad and why British people and representations of British are so alluring but so baffling, what you realise is that there's a whole class thing going on that British people would understand, but foreigners don't understand. And actually a lot of British brands play with the contrasts and paradoxes in British identity to do with tradition and subversion of tradition. And that was how we helped BMW Mini create campaigns that avoided cliche, and it successfully conveyed a sense of premium Britishness. And that was really about understanding how culture is a web of associations, and as sign users in culture, we're all decoding this. I've done a lot of work in Japan as well, obviously a culture which is very, very different to the UK, and the use of seasonal advertising, the use of Zen and sort of codes of Buddhism, for example. You can't explain Muji and their advertising without understanding Buddhism, without understanding evanescence, without understanding transience. A lot of green tea advertising is also driven by that. So, you know, brands are parasitic on culture. Brands can't communicate to a mass. The fact that mass marketing exists is predicated on the fact that there's an intermediating thing between us as individuals and the advertising, and that is culture. Otherwise, brands would have to spend millions more communicating individually. And there's certain colors, there's certain narratives, you know, the hero narrative, certain colors, red versus blue, blue being karma, very, very basic things that most of us read in certain ways. And that's the principle upon which semiotics is based.
I just wanted to ask everybody very quickly, if there's one sort of key do and don't in this whole subject that you like to suggest, and that could be around the common traps companies and brands fall in when it comes to wording, visual identity, creative messages and ideas.
I'll probably say just don't do things for the sake of it, just because you feel like you have to do something. And I suppose the deal would be to be mindful, and just be mindful of actually that you're dealing with human beings and not yes, we all have skin colors and so on and so forth, but we are individuals at the end of the day. So it's actually really connecting to that.
I think the one thing I would say is expect some discomfort in challenging your own views. I mean, I've had to come across, you know, my colorism and the things that I suffer from just my background and from living in a society which has perpetuates certain things. So I think one thing is be prepared to be discomforted, and that's moral bravery, that's moral courage, not just in this issue of race, but in every aspect of change, becoming a better person. I think the do would be, just recognize that maybe, you know, another view through semiotics, through behavioral economics, other ways, some of the services that creates culture and Mel took you through. Some of those things can be really useful in these complex and difficult challenges. We're all here to learn. That's what I'd say. You know, I'm not preaching, but I have got perspectives, and I do passionately believe that we need to talk about racism, but destigmatize it. You know, on the one hand, don't say it doesn't exist, but also let's not be pointing the fingers and condemning people. We all have more work to do.
I think my don't is similar to Oris's. It's don't do things for the sake of doing it. Don't be performative or jump on the bandwagon. Instead, do the ongoing work. Learn, uplift others, change your workspaces. And do your best.
I think the don'ts are really around don't ignore cultural bias, because it does exist, and cultural bias is something we don't see. So we just have to be made aware of it and accept it. I don't think it's impossible, because I think at the end of the day, you know, there are, as I said, experts and teams that are there to help you along the way. You just need to consult the right people. And in terms of the do, not really creative this, but really what I said before, educate, engage, and empower. I think those are really the three key things there.